Another incredible weekend of Disney Lorcana passed. We had lots of events again. There's actually 80 decks to kind of break through. Actually, it might have been 88 if I remember. I added one this morning after doing the meta report last night. But honestly, lots of Disney Lorcana to take care of this weekend. Lots more Sapphire success. But there were some odds and ends that really showed up this weekend. And it's kind of proving to be like, hey, what level of a metagame are we actually playing in? How do we really want to attack it? And things like that. But nonetheless, let's get into our decks today. The week 4 meta report comes in as so. Yep, I know, it's a bit scary. It's a bit alarming. That is 29 Ruby Sapphire decks in top cuts. Now, what I would like to say is that this list is consumed of several top 16 decks from this past weekend. There were, I think, 4, maybe 5 events that were over 100 plus players, and we were able to actually see the top 16 breakdowns, so we did take those. So these aren't all top 8 decks, but the majority of them are. But this is coming off a weekend where last weekend at CCS, Giant Tournament, Ruby Sapphire was completely dominant. You know, it was the finals of the event, and we really saw this breakout performance almost of Ruby Sapphire in week 3 that we hadn't seen since week 1 and since initial like prelims of the kind of initial meta report in general. But, you know, we can see here that Amethyst Steel has another bounce back week. Sapphire Steel items still laying around, still was in the finals of one of the bigger tournaments for the weekend. Amethyst Ruby came out in a big week this weekend. Obviously finding 6 in top 16s, but honestly, mostly with them were found in top 8s. There was actually even one deck that won an event. So big shout out to that. Of course, we have the Amber Emerald aggro deck. Turner Dogs were kind of very much a force to be reckoned with until they walked into a matchup they just absolutely cannot win. But in any field where, you know, Sapphire Steel is kind of being dominant, Turner Dogs feels like a phenomenal answer to that. We saw a lot of that on stream this past weekend that I'm going to discuss. And then Sapphire Steel aggro, really big drop off in all honesty from last week. It was one of the more dominant decks, one of the more successful decks, but we've just seen it kind of by week perish. Ruby Sapphire items, kind of a conditional there. Really, I think the Ruby Sapphire items and the Ruby Sapphire Popsicle or Ruby Sapphire Control are so very close. And the real determining factor of, you know, which is better, which is different, it seems like a really hard choice to kind of get to. Normally, I'm putting it at you have to have at least 14 items in your deck. And anything less than that is not really what I would consider to be an items deck. So that's just kind of where I think that the list is kind of falling right now. Emerald Steel discard, kind of a slow week again, nothing crazy. Amber Steel aggro really fell off this week. In all honesty, it's been a couple weeks now since we've seen that deck be successful. It seems like it's struggling a little bit. Same with Amber Steel songs. We do get 3 Sapphire Amethyst bounce list in the top 16s. None of these decks were in top 8. All top 16 bubble decks in kind of bigger tournaments. So that's really is notable about that deck is it's having a tough time finishing out tournaments. And then, of course, we had 3 Amethyst Emerald discards. One of those lists finishing the top 4 this past weekend. Another successful week. We had an Amethyst Steel Jafar that we're going to take a look at. We're also going to have an Amber Sapphire Mufasa. And then, of course, one lonely aggro deck for Amethyst Amber. So there we have pretty big meta report this week. I think, again, it was 88 decks, if I remember correctly. It might be 80. I know I woke up this morning. I added 8 more because I seen that Ink deck shared another one. So lots of great things going on. Obviously, you know, that is scary. We're going to take a look at some of the breakdowns from this past weekend from shout out to our friends, the Lord Keepers in. But, you know, this is, man, that's a lot of Ruby Sapphire. After a week where we came off of where Sapphire Steel was completely dominant, we now just like kind of drop down Sapphire Steel by significant amounts and then just fill it with, you know, nearly 30 Ruby Sapphire decks, finding success, finding top 8s, finding victories, top 4s, and things like that. So big bounce back week for Ruby Sapphire after, you know, winning. You know, we won the CCS. And then we came back from winning the CCS and just everyone really jumped on the train and said, yeah, Sisu on a coil is kind of insane. And that's really what we saw. But nonetheless, breakdown's great. Let me know how you feel about it. Let me know, If there's anything crazy here, topic of the day, honestly, it's somewhere over here. Is it here? Here? It's over there. Over there. Yeah. Banhammer time. Or it's time. Should we be banning cards? Should we be eroding cards? Like what is this a problem? Or are we just like, yeah, whatever, we'll just make it through. Hope set eight's better. I don't know. Let me know. Let me know in the comments what you think. Ban, no ban. Derek from Team Maelstrom had a really successful weekend at the World Class Cards 5Ks. He picked up a top 8 and a top 4 respective finishes playing Ruby Sapphire. This was the most dominant deck of the weekend. Derek most certainly found success with it. Shout out to his other team members also finding some success with this deck this past weekend. So, this really is just a, by definition, look at the metagame, understanding what's good, what's bad, what we're really excited about doing. Most of these decks have been more on of a 3-2 split or a 3-3 split for Be Prepared and Sisus. We're seeing the 4-1 split here. I'm definitely really excited about that. I think that that's probably where this list is actually going to just perform to its best levels. Everyone has to go into a tournament expecting you, or at least respecting the number of Be Prepared that you might have in your deck. So having one of them is a sign. Once they see one, they have to be hesitant about it throughout the entire matchup. I'm also really team one a Pirate's Life. I think a Pirate's Life is definitely a card that is necessary in some games, specifically on the draw. These aggro decks can really come out swinging and really make it difficult. And literally just one a Pirate's Life. We don't need sharks. We don't need any of those things. We just need one lore drain effect in the game. And when those happens, it makes it that much more difficult for the aggro decks to really finish out the games. So I'm really enjoying that. I think the how far it goes are still phenomenal. The attribute to 2 Cuscos, very interesting. Curious how many locations that might have gotten rid of. But it's also saying like, hey, if you put out a dime early, I have an answer. We've seen in recent weeks some decks just not respecting any of those things whatsoever. So it's nice to say, like, what, at the end of the day, this is a character that we can put into play. It has 2 lore. It can randomly give resist, but ultimately, if I'm not going to play sharks, I don't need to play hideaway. I'd rather play a character that just like does everything for me, that it does it when I need it. And in the end, it is inkable. So huge shout out to that. The Tamatoa only, happy as a clam, only being a 2 of, very interesting. That's a card that seems so very good that everyone is kind of just gravitated towards 4 of, but we found a way to keep this list at 60 and, really add some versatility to it. Also, 2 Maleficents. So I think this deck is really just saying like, hey, I'm going to really weigh my threats and removal as much as possible, do my best to kind of make it through the mirror matches, definitely be well positioned in the Sapphire Steel items list. So I think a lot of what is going on here is done very well. Huge shout out to Derek for having a really great weekend at World Class Cards. Jim Miller picked up a top 4 this past weekend in the Sunday 5K, which was 125 players, and he was featuring a pretty interesting version of Amethyst Steel. As you can see, this list is going back to Robin Hood, Sheriff of Nottingham. This is a card that we've really not seen very much whatsoever. It's popped up here and there in some songs decks, but it really has not been any type of a threat in Amethyst Steel in quite some time. Really nice addition. Obviously, 6 willpower is a very big issue for Sapphire Steel. As we can see, it's so hard for them to kind of answer Hiram, and things like that. So that's a little bit of a success leaves clues type scenario. What kind of a character can we put into play that's going to be problematic? I also want to shout out the Jafar. I think Jafar is a very, very interesting character because, again, we talked about this in recent weeks. Some of the problems with Amethyst Steel into Ruby Sapphire is the idea that you don't actually have enough threats to kind of get to 20. But him being this 3-2 character with 2 lore that still has this crab-S ability is good enough on average. It still allows, your Diablos to trade up. It actually makes Captain Hook very interesting. Now that we're playing Captain Hook, we have Smee, we have Jafar. We're adding a little bit more steel removal to this and being a little less kind of restricted by the Amethyst package. Here, no snakes. So we are a dock deck, and we do not have snakes, and we do not have foxes. So that's also a big testament to what this list is really representing, is that it's really breaking the mold for the Amethyst Steel aggro decks. And I think that's a really interesting note. If you're looking to change it up, if you're finding yourself in a rut, maybe this is a bit of like an innovation to that list and saying, hey, is this possible that this is the way that this deck has to go in the current metagame? Huge shout out to Jim here for a nice top 4 finish. Skylar picked up the win in the 5K on Saturday, featuring Sapphire Steel items. The biggest takeaway here is the continuous conversation of what this deck needs to be doing on turn 2. Skylar has been Team Chicha for quite some time, very advocate for it in the interview he did. And it's really one of those cards that, again, it's just like, hey, if we can see the right lines, if we can go on turn 2, if we can play our Fishbone Quill on turn 3, we're going to instantly draw a card. It also gives the ability to play Chicha on 2 and then just sail on 3 instead, and then just go another 2-drop or another 1-drop, things like that. Kind of just go Chicha, sail, ink, item, draw 3 cards. Definitely some lines there. I will say this Jim Hawkins is in the list, and I can understand why it's there for the aggro matchups, but I believe Skylar was on stream for 4 rounds, and this character never hit play. And this deck draws a lot of cards. So take the gym with a grain of salt. It very well could just be anything probably that was inkable in a world where the character just like wasn't there in almost any of his stream matches. Honestly promise you, I do not remember that card ever being in play, ever challenging, ever questing. I didn't see it. So because of that, I have a feeling that it's probably more of a niche final, cards in the pick, and it can probably just be like whatever inkable you really want it to be. Maybe you just want to play 4 Pete's because we only have 2 of them. Aside from that, list is very straightforward. Nothing crazy here. No last cannons. No Maurice's workshop. We do also need to understand there are 2 fire the cannons here and 0 let the storm rage on. And he said in an interview that at this point, let the storm rage on is actually more of a liability than it is going to be anything else. And it's hard not to agree to that. I think most of the game has adapted to this concept that I cannot play a character on the field that's just going to get Lord of the Storm Rage on. So in that world, you can go to the next level and one up the metagame and say, all right, I'm just not going to play that card. So huge shout out there. And of course, like, that fire the cannons real quick, just the tip on it. One more. It's really good in a lot of certain matchups, like the ability to pay 1 at any given moment and shoot a character, shoot a Diablo, get rid of it because they think it's protected. Just shoot little Sisus. One of the things that can definitely beat you in Sisu on Ice matchup is that Sisu that comes out, if you don't have an answer to it and you don't want to Strength of a Raging Fire a baby, a Sisu Daring Visitor, right? Like that's not something we want to do. We don't want to Zeus it. So for just the low cost of 1 ink, being able to shoot it down, I think is pretty great. It's going to buy you another turn or 2. It's going to force those opponents to have the be prepared in some situations. So I really like the addition of Fire the Cannons for that specific matchup. Huge shout out to Skylar. Great list in the end. Definitely, again, kind of continuing that conversation of like, what is this deck's best 60 cards? Ruby Amethyst picks up a win in a 127 player tournament. And this deck is filled with the spice. You actually have to love it. You got to respect it. Pegasus makes a return. The 2-cost 3/1 evasive. The Queen of Hearts 1/4 character we've been talking about for a few weeks now on here on the Metafy. Really just discussing what 4 willpower is doing. Again, no Flynn Riders. We don't need that card. But we found a way to find Elsas. We found a way to put Maui's, Lady Trimmings, Madame Medusa, and that's right, Donald Duck. Donald Duck, the Flustered Sorcerer, is the 7-cost uninkable, 5 strength, 6 willpower with 3 lore, and the ability Obfuscate. Opponents need 25 lore to win the game. I have no idea if this character won this player any games. But what I love to think is that it did. I love to think that, you know what? Your opponent is sitting there. They're setting up this combo turn with their Tamatoa. They're going to get to 20 lore. They're going to feel so great. And you're like, yeah, no, sir. We're going to tell you that you have to get to 25. And I really do wonder if that was a true kink in the plan for so many comboist decks trying to gain 10 to 15 lore with Tamatoas. I think it's hilarious that this card may have actually been a difference maker. No idea, didn't see it, have no clue. Would love to know if the deck gets out there. People have been playing Donald Duck and it's been making a difference. Oh man, do I want to know about it? Very cool addition to this list. 3 Be Prepared, 4 Friends on the Other Side, the Brawls, all of that stuff is great. Of course, having Elsa back is great and interesting. There's just a lot of choices here, a lot of things going around. If you really look at this, 2 snakes, 3 foxes, really breaking the norms there, 2 genie, 4 rabbits, kind of also considering just moving this deck and kind of really trying to figure out where it fits in the metagame. Huge shout out here, lots of creativity, awesome win in a 127 player tournament. Shout out to our friend Jack at SSG. He had a phenomenal weekend at the World Class Cards 5K, picked up back to back top eights with the dogs. You gotta love it. This is a deck that people have been cheering for. It's a deck that I was really high on and really discussing, like, hey, I think that this deck being successful in Disney Lorcana is a huge win. It's a huge step in the right direction for Disney Lorcana fans and Disney fans. We just don't have enough decks in the metagame that are this wonderful addition saying, hey, I just want to play Lady and the Tramp because I love Lady and the Tramp. Well, now you can do that and it can be good. I think that that's huge. I think it's a big showing for a direction change in Disney Lorcana. If we can get more decks like this, I think it's only going to be good for the game in general. It's going to hit the casuals. It's going to hit the competitive. This deck does so many cool things, so many interesting things, really does create these really insane lines. One of the crazier things about this list is I think you're going to see there's no piglets. That's right. We don't even want the captain. We don't need him. He's not important. We want, how many 1-drops is this? 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Technically, if we're doing it right, 24 1-cost characters because of the Tramp and Lady interaction. I think this deck is great. I think it's really fun. I do think that it is very difficult into a Ruby Sapphire metagame. Watching Jax over the weekend, he had 2 very tough matchups. One of them was Amber Steel, and one of them was Ruby Sapphire. So this deck knows its place in the metagame. It's saying, like, hey, if Sapphire Steel is dominant, I'm going to absolutely torch my opponents. I'm just going to put so many things into play with 4 willpower so quickly that my opponent is not going to understand whatsoever how to interact. And I think that's awesome. The addition of Donald Duck, a lot of people have been having the conversation of Donald over Chip. What's better? What's doing it? I think having the speed bump and forcing your opponent to interact to a speed bump is the way to go right now. While I like the 3/3 stat line, it's just the 3/3, that grants a lore. Whereas at the very least, Donald is protecting your really aggressive starts. This deck, I saw it a lot. Turn 1, we played a Daisy. Turn 2, we played a Lady and a Tramp. Turn 3, we played a Donald, protected everybody, and just kept going, kept the questing party moving forward. So this deck is just looking to be pedal to metal. It's looking to close out the game with a card like Chernabog. I will say the earlier the Chernabog, the better. I saw a lot of late game Chernabogs that were just answered. The other little worry about this list is that it's very soft to, we don't talk about Bruno, and discard in general. If they're able to discard your hard down and you're kind of just stuck on a Chernabog, and then you put a Chernabog into play, shuffle all your cards back in, and then they literally just, we don't talk about Bruno it, your game ends pretty quickly, which is what we did see for Jack in the top 8 on Sunday. So huge shout out to Jack. Awesome performance this weekend. Cannot wait to see you this weekend and have another round of awesome chats. We are a month into the Archazias Island. We've had lots of chapters already updated, but this one week, we're going to break down the full month. We're going to tell you, like, hey, here's the information, here's the stats, here's what we're going to be looking at, here's how you can attack the next month. We still have a month until set champs, which is absolutely insane, but this is where you're going to find the details. We're going to have tournament reports coming out. We have 9 members of TFM going and representing at Southside Gaming next weekend. So there's a lot of information going in for that. What is going to be played? What is going to be, what's going to be successful? What are all the reports going to come from on the back end? Huge shout out to Southside Gaming. Looking forward to come out and play. But if you're looking to support TFM, no better way to do it than pick up the Ultimate Guide, hit the support tier, get this for 50% off. Huge shout out to everyone that already has so far. You guys are incredible. Let's get back to the decks. So the Sapphire Steel Aggro deck is definitely taking a bit of a turn, but hey, we picked up a win in just a 32-player event. I really wanted to showcase this list because I do think it's quite different. I think it's answering the metagame in a couple different ways, and it's also showcasing some cards that we just simply have not seen out of this, deck idea and this deck concept. We picked up a Helga. Helga's a card that I'm pretty high on. It's a card that I talked about recently in other platforms and other, podcasts and things like that. This is a card that I was playing in my Amethyst Steel list. Wendy is a card that I've never been too crazy about, never been too high on. I think that every single time we have tried to put Wendy in a deck, within 10 games, we're like, yeah, this card's just not good enough. But you know what it is a warded character. It's a warded character with 2 lore that has the abilities for support. It can make some interesting trades. It can offer the ability for a Bell to go into a Hiram against Ruby Sapphire, which is really notable. So it does give you some very interesting outs in some of the specific matchups. And maybe that's enough. Like maybe we just have to understand that we need to have the like insane amount of answers to Hiram as possible because people are just putting them in play and getting away with it. And if that's the case, then Wendy, like she just might be one of the better options for it in general. Hard to say. But some of the other cards in here that are really notable are Bagheera, right? Bagheera, we've seen that come up in some Amber Steel aggro decks. Not as much recently, but you know, Aerial Treasure Collector is the another addition here that this deck is now all the way going to 6 cost on Inkables with the, you know, just 8 items in our deck saying, hey, against most matchups, I'm going to have more items than you. And this card is going to be able to win me the game by through 5 lore that's ward. And that's also notable that this deck any of the Ruby decks have a very difficult time answering this card. Honestly, every of the Steel decks, like a 3/4 with Ward, is very hard to get off the field. So, you know, it can definitely easily close out games for you. The other addition here, Double Trouble. Yeah, Double Trouble is the 2 cost Inkable that does 1 damage to 2 different characters. I'm not really sure what this card is for. I don't know on average what we really actually need it for. So I'm a little confused about Double Trouble, but you know, it's really sad when I would probably rather just have Baboom if we're just looking for a, you know, a 2 cost inkable burn, but you know, nonetheless. 4 Let the Storm Rage on, 1 Strength of a Raging Fire, I think is very notable. I think that, you know, we just talked about this. I would rather have the Inkables, specifically in this deck where we're having way more characters, if I'm being honest. I'd rather just flip those numbers. If we want to play 1 Storm, I probably just wouldn't. I'd probably just take it out and play, you know, like 1 Fire the Cannons instead, and then just play 4 Strength of Raging Fire. If we're looking for the budget version, I'm sure that this is helpful. You know, the Let the Storm Rage On is only $1 or $2 common, and Strength of Raging Fire is approaching $20 to $30 for a rare. So, you know, uh, it's interesting nonetheless. I think that the other choice here is adding the Grab Your Swords. So this is really just maybe a true metagame prediction for their tournament. Maybe they just know what their community is playing very well, and we're able to really just scope our deck to be successful in it. So yeah, I think it's interesting. This was just really offering up the concept of like, hey, there's a lot of cards in the Sapphire Steel in combination, and we don't need to always play the same ones. We can definitely create some questions that need to be answered from opponents just by playing slightly differently. Emerald Amethyst Discard picks up a top 4 finish in the Sunday event at the World Class Games 5K. This list pretty much spot on to exactly what we were looking at last week. The only difference is the addition of Has Set My Heart, the 2 cost inkable banish chosen item. Super straightforward, just does a thing. So this is just the kind of answer saying like I'm just not going to get hosed by a lucky dime probably, or I'm not going to get hosed by a fishbone quill or you know, like even a great stone dragon. You know, I think that a lot of these, like a lot of issues that this deck will have is that their opponent can really get ahead on ink and kind of just like stay ahead and just utilize, you know, if they utilize their discard against you, it's a big deal. Like if you're like Sudden Shield, and they're like, oh, okay, I'll just dump my Sisu, whatever, and then I just turn my uninkable from my discard into a card that's just in my inkwell. Well, that's pretty notable. So, you know, maybe that's like a tribute saying like, hey, that was a weakness I had seen. Something that I can kind of capitalize on is removing Greatstone Dragons and kind of punishing my opponents so they're not like just getting everything they want from their characters and double downing on uninkables to inkable things. I think that's a pretty nice note. Everything else about this list, pretty straightforward. We did remove the Iagos. So, like, you know, the Iago is probably a nice little trick for week 1, but it looks like we got away from it in week 2. Everything else about this list, pretty straightforward, pretty great. I think it's very interestingly like positioned in the metagame. I think it's definitely attacking on a few different levels. I really love the, you know, just like the very low to the ground Diablo army. I love the idea of Cricky in this list and just being able to like trade up whenever you want to. The one thing that maybe I'm a little hesitant about is the idea that there's no coves in this list, and our Diablos are a bit, you know, listen, they're a bit little a little worrisome that we're going to lose Diablos too easily to cards. Whereas I think Cove really does, say, hey, you have to at least one up and find another answer. But hey, aside from that, I think it's great. I think this list is good. I think this list is good for the metagame in general and creating the diversity that you can really choose from. Huge shout out to Lim here for picking up a top 4. Now we're going to go and look at some of the spice from the weekend because it's really hard not to. This was the second place finish at the 32 player Enchanted Robin Hood tournament. And we are playing Jafar Wheel. And listen, I know this isn't the biggest meta thing. We're not going to like go crazy and we're not going to like win some giant tournament with Jafar or anything like that. Listen, I get that. But what I really like to say is that, hey, there's a lot of Disney Lorcana left to be played in set 7. And when we see creativity, it's very important to double down on it and show guys like, listen, it's not all doom and gloom. You can have fun. You can find some success with some different things. And I think that this deck is really representing that. We have a new Jafar in the metagame that you can talk about. This 3/2 is a card that's relevant. It helps you trade up with certain characters. It helps you kind of like move the game forward. It's another threat. It's 2 lore in itself. The one thing that I'll say that I find most interesting about this list is the Floodborn Captain Hook from Chapter 1. We haven't seen this card in forever, and it's still saying like, hey, I need all these 1-drops that can shift. So I have Captain Hook, I have Robin Hood. I do wonder if there's some other better option. Like I think honestly, Sticky Mickey is probably better even without the brooms. Because it's all inkable, and I think that that's a little bit to note. So if there's players looking for some type of change, then changing to Sticky Mickeys and the Shift Broom Mickey could be a nice direction for you. But aside from that, we got Jafar Wheel. We know how this deck works. We've seen it over and over again. We haven't seen it really have success in set 7, so it is notable. Like, hey, there's people out there still finding some success, which I love to tack on about. And, also adding the shift line for Tinkerbell is a big deal too, because this is not a line we really had in the past. Sometimes we did have like the blue fairy list of this, and we were just playing Tinkerbells because she's a Floodborn. But now we also have the shift line. I think it's very good too. I really think that shifting Tinkerbell is a way to answer a lot of the metagame. So it's definitely a notable strategy. Huge shout out again here for picking up the second place finish with a really unique deck. And last, but certainly not least, the first place winner in a 44-player Win-A-Case event comes in the form of Amber Sapphire Mufasa. That's right, it's dubbed the Blue Fasa. I think this deck is very, very interesting. There are some very cards that I don't think has ever been registered in tournaments before, which is super notable. So the notable additions here are the Merlin Self-Appointed Mentor, which is just a 4-cost 3/4, 1 lore and support. Yep, that's what we're doing. We have the Ben, Ben, a Cedric robot, I believe, is the 4-cost 4/3 with 2 lore that's inkable and support. Okay, and it's a lot of this, a lot of the deck is just revolved around support. And of course, the Mini Mouse Musketeer, the 5-cost uninkable 1/5 with 2 lore bodyguard. And when you play this character, banish chosen opposing character with 5 or more strength. So we got 4 of those, and we have 4 World's Greatest Criminal Minds, which is about the most effective forms of removal in Amber. If you can really line up support and you can get the most out of it, then you can certainly just banish literally whatever character you want in the game. So I think this list is very interesting. It's obviously pedal to the metal. We got the Anna, we have Wendy's, we have Moana. There's a lot of 2 lore threats here that kind of move the game forward. There's a lot of things that are very good Rapunzel value. And Mufasa obviously is great. The Baymax is another really interesting card. So this deck is doing a lot of really cool things. It's attacking the game in a lot of different manners, and it really found a way to kind of deal with characters in its own weakness, understanding hey, literally with Ben, I can basically say that I can banish any card I want just by questing. Quest, buff something by 4. Naturally, almost everything in the game has at least 1 strength, so they go to 5, and then you can just be yeah, I'm just gonna World's Greatest Criminal Mind your guy, or I'm just gonna put a Minnie Mouse into play, which is my bodyguard, which is bodyguarding my Ben, and I'm gonna remove your character from the game. So this is a way to actually get rid of high rims, which is insane to say. You can really just flip the game over. Obviously, Minnie Mouse and uh, World's Greatest Criminal Mind just answer basically all of the win conditions for Ruby Sapphire, which is very notable. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. I have not played a single game with this list for what it's worth, but I do think that this is a really cool way to attack the metagame. I think it's nice that it picked up, 44 players is not necessarily a small tournament. That would be a very large set championship. So 44 players is nothing to scoff at for this particular list on this event. I would love to know, what was played, what was the breakdown of this tournament. Sadly for the tournament, this is the only deck that we had seen that was reported on it. I would love to have seen what the rest of the top 8 was and kind of just predict how that went. But super cool, super innovative, and you kind of love to see it. All right, let's take a moment to take a look at the top 16 breakdown from each of the tournaments this past weekend at World Class Cards. Huge shout out to the lore keepers in Katie this past weekend. She was able to get the brackets going, making everything work out. She streamed along with JDZ and Clara for nearly 22 hours this past weekend with compliments of Lore 20 Pro as well. 2 channels going at it hard, and a huge shout out to their grind this weekend. Gotta love it. Gotta support it. Got a huge shout out to them for it. And here we are looking at this bracket. You can see this metagame was very, and I do mean very, Sapphire heavy. There are 13 Sapphire decks that brought up this event and just said, like, yeah, it was dominant. And of course, the finals, we had 2 Sapphire Steel item lists, Skylar and Beefcake, really just throwing throwing dice at one another, and it went away. Just showcasing the power of this deck, the power of Sapphire in general. And then a quick look at day 2 here. Way different, right? Like a way different look here. Obviously, the right side of that bracket only had 2 Sapphire decks. The left side, a little bit different. But of course, in the end, we went to a top 4 split with 2 Ruby Sapphire on the left, and then the Amethyst, Emerald, and Amethyst Steel on the right. So a very different looking tournament. And this is kind of why I wanted to bring this up before we go into the full breakdown, is because like this is not, it's not shocking at all. I think a lot of people saw this and they're like, oh yeah, great. We can find a way. We can break the meta game. We know, like, it doesn't have to all be doom or gloom. Day 1 had 6 Sapphire Steels or 7 Sapphire Steels, and then day 2 had 0. Okay, well, at the heyday, and I do mean this, at the heyday of Star City Games, and when they were running Friday, Saturday, Sunday events, and there were players that were playing in Friday, Saturday, Sunday events, and I mean like, not some 30-person tournament, not some 26-person tournament. No, we're talking like numbers that were upright of above 65 players. In a couple of those events, you had, honestly, 120 plus players in those tournaments. Well, on Friday, it was normally like, all right, who was able to just come in for the whole weekend, take off. It's a smaller tournament. I think, the biggest one that I can remember on Friday was like 67 players or something like that. Still 67 players on a Friday. But when you go in on a 67 player tournament on Friday, what they were doing is they were cutting to a day 2, and then those players were getting a bye in the other event. So you could see from day 1 to day 2, like, hey, that's the top 8 at end of day 1. They come in early, they play round 1, people get knocked out. They go into the tournament, no buys. Top 4 gets a buy, and then top 2 actually, in some cases, we're getting 2 buys. So what would happen is that the winner would win the tournament, and then he would get 2 buys into the next tournament, which is, I mean, massive. Like, super, super insane for anyone that like ever gets a round 1 buy and you're like, yeah, this is great. I get to relax for first hour. I get no bad tiebreakers. Well, imagine if you could get 2 buys. So in those tournaments, it was very easy for the player to just max EV on the weekend based on Friday, because if they got a 2 buys, it's crazy in a 7-round tournament, 8-round tournament. They very much were scaling and just finding a way to win and top 8 again. So they were able to run it back. But even in those situations, it was very, very rare that the same player came in a large tournament. Again, I'm not talking about the smaller events now. Southside Gaming sadly fell off, or not Southside Games, sorry. No, don't take that. Star City Games fell off in a really, really large way. But now, you're talking about these tournaments that if Ruby Amethyst walked in day 1 and it was dominant, it was going to be in day 2, but there was no way it was going to win day 2. Just wasn't going to do the back-to-back thing. It wasn't going to happen. There was going to be enough of a shift of the player base that was there, the information, that people walking around the room and seeing it. This is what happened at World Class Games, World Class Cards. Everyone was there. Everyone saw the success of Sapphire Steel. everyone audibled. They're like, you know what? If that deck's gonna win and people are gonna flip to that or people are gonna lean on that, we're not gonna let that happen. So because of that, you saw a giant shift in the room. We're talking about the same players in the same tournaments in the same room for 2 days. It would have been honestly miraculous for Sapphire Steel to be successful in day two after basically dominating day one. Just not really. Honestly, the biggest winner was Ruby Sapphire because Ruby Sapphire had the most decks in top 16. Like it still was the most successful ink combination conversion from registered to top 16. So, like, because it wasn't in the finals and people doubled down on their Sapphire Steel matchups, Sapphire Steel got hated out of the top 16, and Ruby Sapphire still found two of them in the top four. So huge shout out to Ruby Sapphire players that just doubled down because they're like, my deck is still good. Like if you want to target this deck, that's great for me because that's the problem with the metagame right now is that you can't simply target both of these fairly. You can make the choice of being high willpower. You can make the choice of being high strength. You can make the choice of answering coils or not answering coils, but it is very difficult to put a deck into play in any game and say, I am great into Ruby Sapphire and Sapphire Steel. And I'm great into the aggro versions and the item versions and the item versions and the shark versions and the control. Like, it's just not a thing right now. So that's why I think there was like this big rambunctious reaction, like, oh yeah, Sapphire didn't do good in day two. It's like, I bet you a lot of players got off it. I mean, we saw several players that were playing it in day one, not play it in day two on purpose. And I think that's because they know, right? If they think, oh, the metagame is going to shift to an aggressive metagame, well, then I better shift to a mid range deck that's great into an aggressive metagame. So it's just a wheel, guys. You keep spinning. Wanted to take a quick look at the first 4 weekends of the meta report here. You can kind of see the development from left to right, top to bottom of how we've gone. We started with Ruby Sapphire on top, and now we ended the month with Ruby Sapphire on top. In a lot of these weeks in between, Sapphire Steel has been the most dominant, most successful decks. The one thing and biggest takeaway is these Sapphire Steel aggro decks have really fallen off. Early on, the first couple of weeks, they were very, very strong. And the last couple of weeks, they have just completely continued to fall off over and over again. And obviously, ups and downs and all arounds, we're seeing different decks find success. Amethyst Steel aggro kind of remained a constant. We've seen it through all these weeks, in the top 5 most on average, or tied in the top 5 and things like that. So you're still seeing that as a default choice for a lot of players. And of course, like Emerald Steel, Amber Steel, they're kind of just a bunch of like who's going to do what is going to be successful, what kind of room do we need for it to be successful. Ruby Amethyst is probably the biggest takeaway. It was pretty much done, really non-existent. There were even tournaments where it was not even registered in, and now you're kind of finding the bounce back, and we're kind of seeing it be successful again. So shout out to Ruby Amethyst players finding their place in the metagame, at least this past weekend. We'll see how long it sticks. Dogs, definitely up and down all around again. We've seen them find success, but we've yet to really see Dogs win a tournament and really like be the dominant deck. And I think it's because it is so narrow. It's really targeting a very specific portion of the metagame. And if you roll into some of those bad matchups, because it really does have some very hard bad matchups. Last night, I watched the Amethyst Emerald deck. So yeah, watching that deck get dominated by the discard deck this weekend, a bit of a problem. I imagine its Emerald Steel matchup is kind of similar. Its Amber Steel matchup is not, great either. So it's very much saying like, hey, I'm gonna target a very specific part of the metagame, and if I can go on runs, and clearly Jack was able to find a way to do that this past weekend. So huge shout out to Jack for really finding success with it. But both of the times that he got on camera in top 8, it just seemed like matchups that you do not want to be playing in. Even having I believe he was on the play day one and still, lost, which is a big deal. It's kind of one of those understandings like, hey, I definitely have some weakness here, and how can we shoe up those things? So very interesting to display. Look at this, kind of just understand like, hey, this is the full breakdown over the first month of Disney Lorcana. There we have it. Another wonderful amount of decks this past weekend. 88 decks broken down today. And, Sapphire is and still has remained to be the most dominant force to be reckoned with in this in this format. It's a bit scary now. I think that we really look at the numbers and you understand in day one, 13 Sapphire decks were in the top 16, which is like 4 of Popsicles, 4 of Hyrims. Like the number just doesn't go away. So yeah, I think that if the game is left the same, it's going to be a stagnant couple of months. I don't think, there's a lot of players like, oh, people need to be more creative. Like, listen, you can be as creative as you want. And the real truth is, at the end of the day, is that much like set 2, when the Madame Mim Merlin package came out, it was just the most consistent thing to do. And right now, Sapphire is the most consistent thing to do. And right now, Sapphire is the best on the draw win rate, because not only can you fight to the board in a manner of ink with Tipo and with Sally Azraitzi catching up, and even in some cases being ahead of your opponent, even on the draw in your inkwell, you now have Bell as well. Like, we just have like, oh, we can just fight to the board with a 3/3. So right now, Sapphire just kind of has it all. And that's really why these other decks just aren't showing the same level of consistency, because at the end of the day, they just don't have the ability to. They don't have 8 Popsicles. They don't have Hyrim. They don't have, how far it goes and Grandma Talas and things like that. They just consistently say, like, every card I play replaces itself. And when I'm not playing a card that replaces itself, I'm playing a card that like actually wins the game or completely just beats his opponent out of the game. And I think that those are the problems. I think that between the two decks, we have an issue. And I hope that Ravensburger does something. I think that the game needs something to be done, because otherwise the next 2 months, and honestly further, like we can always make a claim that says like, oh, we're just going to wait to the next set and we got to feel it out. But the strength level of Sapphire in set 7 metagame, I think that it's very arguable that it's way more consistent, and it's not like, I said that like, oh, we have Bell and we have Tipo and we have Sale and it doesn't even necessarily need that every game, which is the scary thing. Like, you can have a pretty slow start, and at any point in the game, you can still technically like accelerate. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway, is that, for Emerald Steel of the day, turn 1 Diablo was or turn 2 Diablo was the most dominant thing that you can do, because there wasn't enough interaction, enough answers, and you could protect him so very well. But Diablo did get worse as the game went on. Popsicle doesn't get worse. Hyrim doesn't get worse. A free 3/3 doesn't get worse. So that's another compounding effect here too, is that I don't think people really understand that the amount of game actions you're taking in a turn completely outweighs everything your opponent's doing. So that's where I'm at. I think Ravensburger, they need to do something, and I hope that they do it very, very soon. But thank you guys so much for watching today. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know how you feel about the metagame. Do we love it? Do we hate it? Do you want to ban? What do we ban? That's really the topic that I would love to carry today. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed the vibe, you're not familiar, you're not here yet, make sure you hit subscribe. Of course, as always, hit that like button for me, and we will catch you in the next one.